Well, if you like true crime, you're probably going to love this. This is Flashback Perspectives. I'm Instructor Thompson in my self-defense studio. This is our podcast and blog on real violence. Please, if you enjoy the series, listen and learn vicariously the best way, because the price has already been paid. It's been paid in full and often paid in blood. Next up in Flashback Perspectives, we have Michael SENSEI. Michael Mendoza is a phenomenal martial arts instructor, and it's been quite some time going through all of these Flashback Perspectives interviews. This is the first one that we've actually had an instructor who shared multiple stories. Usually we just do one, or sometimes two, but the amount of lessons that he shares here is phenomenal, and it kind of just happened naturally as we were just having a discussion. The amount of things that he has experienced in different ways he's experienced them, there are so many phenomenal lessons in this one interview. I am a huge fan of all of the instructors, Michael SENSEI, and everybody who has shared all of their wonderful perspectives about what real violence is like, what they thought about these things throughout the timeline of self-defense. But this particular interview, you will find story after story of excellent points. Please listen and learn the best way from Michael SENSEI. So,
welcome everybody to Flashback Perspectives. I have here today Michael SENSEI. He's a fantastic instructor. I'm going to have him introduce himself, and he's here to share a story with us. Please, 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 attention. I love all of his lessons. If you would, sir, please tell us who you are and what you do.
Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Okay, well, so yes, Michael Mendoza, Michael William Mendoza, legally by birth. I teach the martial arts. I teach primarily Okinawan karate and feeding crane, white crane kung fu. I had a cup of coffee stint as a professional boxer back in the 80s and have competed pretty much at everything. But you're wanting life really for real self-defense stories.
Sure.
So the one I want to give you is a warning. I was never in a situation where I felt like I would be surprised if I got attacked. You know, I was never walking my girlfriend home. I was never getting in my car and muggers attacked me. I started teaching when I was 25, and it was Hank De La Vega who gave me the opportunity. He said, "Hey, you know, I've got a dojo. I also got to work, and so if you want to help me and do a couple classes a week, you know, I'll split it with you." Blah 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 blah. And I was really big into karma. I mean, you know, I was really big into spirituality, and I'd seen some things in the service that I couldn't reconcile with my training. You know, I'd seen a Marine go upside a sailor's head with a beer mug. They didn't teach us that in class. You know, bam, no warning, straight upside his head with a beer mug. And so I didn't know. I knew that ever since I was 12, I knew I wanted to teach the martial arts. But I didn't know if that shit worked. I didn't know if it worked past bowing to each other and deciding, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And so, how am I going to teach this? How am I going to teach this wrist lock? How am I going to teach this escape if I've never experienced outside of a competitive, you know, situation, not a hostile situation?
Right.
And so, I needed money anyway.
Right.
You know, I wasn't going to make enough money with one part-time job and a dojo twice a week. And so I took every bad job that an unqualified person could do. I did security at crack hotels. I was the head of security at San Joaquin General Hospital. I did bodyguarding for some of the shadiest characters. The characters that yesterday is a cancel check, tomorrow's a promissory note. He died in the Las Vegas hotel room after being shot 8 times by one of the fighters that he was promoting. A dear friend who would hold my baby girl in his arms when she was a baby. And, you know, a friend of mine calls and said, "Hey, didn't you used to work for Rick Parker?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "He was just shot to death. I just read on Ring Magazine he was shot to death by one of his fighters."
Wow.
And So that happened anyway. But so I did that shit. What I did was I took every job that I wasn't going to start a fight.
Right.
I believe in karma. I was all Zen Catholic, and
Mm.
I was a Catholic, Buddha, Hindu, Wicca, universalholic. But I was deeply in tune with the source of my being. And so, God damn it, if I was going to teach something, it was going to work. I wasn't going to teach it. And so I put myself in situations where I was most probably going to have to defend myself. I was most probably going to have to manage violence. But that's where I first came up with the term managing violence, as opposed to self-defense or
Right.
whatever. And so, I worked at biker bars, cowboy bars. It was during the line dancing craze, and shit was always happening. And in a drunken situation, when you've got three doormen, bouncers, whatever the fuck you want to call them, and one of them is an off-duty prison guard, and the other one is a college, linebacker from UOP, and you got this old Mexican guy that everybody says can do karate. Who you pick on when you're drunk? Which
Right.
one of that lineup are you going to go for? So I saw some bad situations that I had to manage, but it was never a situation where before I was thinking nothing could possibly happen. I always knew that as soon as I stepped into work, something could happen. And so I was never surprised by being attacked. There were a couple of times when after the initiation of the defense, I became very surprised. And this is a story I told. I told this story on TikTok because people were bugging me. Talk about your self-defense. Talk about your fights. And I thought, I'm only going to do that if there's a real serious lesson to be learned. Not to say, I stepped on this guy's hand and everybody pissed himself.
Right.
Fuck
Right.
that.
Right.
But if there's a real lesson to be learned,
Yeah.
And in the hand stomping one, there's a real lesson to be learned. But so I started with the story about the first time I tried to put somebody in an arm bar, in a cowboy bar. And because I've done, and now what we're talking about, I used to call, when I teach, I call it strangle the serpent. You grab one wrist with both hands, dig in deep, elbow over the armpit, turn the palm up. And so you're using your armpit to break the elbow, right? Or force them to the ground or whatever.
Right.
So got both hands on the wrist, armpit on the elbow, take them down, lock it behind them, whatever, key lock.
Right. Right.
Dozens of times in competition, hundreds and hundreds of times just doing it with a friend.
In practice, right?
And so this one night, there's a drunk cowboy at the bar. The bartender, she waves me over. I walk over to him and I say, "Hi, buddy." The bartender says, "You're done." Right. And I might have put my hand on his shoulder. I might have just started to reach for his shoulder. That moment's kind of a blur because he came up and he swung a backhand. I don't know if he's trying to grab me or he's trying to bitch slap me. Something was happening. He would just back this, boom. No sweat, man. In this moment, the arrogance of recognition,
Right.
and I grabbed that wrist and I turned my back and I slipped off it like it was a slip and slide. I just slid off of his arm, slid off it. And I'm standing there with my back to him they talk about relativity, man. In that fluttering of an eyelash, I felt myself getting stuck with the broken fucking beer bottle. I felt myself getting smashed with that. I just thought about every possible thing that could go wrong.
Right.
My back turned to the guy that just tried to hit me.
Right.
And of course, it wasn't more than a fraction of a second. I, turned around, boom. And by that time, the other two guys had him sitting back in the chair because we never approached anybody alone.
Well, that's, yes.
But that didn't occur to me in that moment when I tried to control this guy and immediately lost control. Control. I had the willies for quite a long time. I woke up in the middle of the night with the willies. In that moment, piss, blood, vomit, beer, anything that can make that shit slick. Anything. That's when I started to conceptualize my principle that when you're grappling, friction is your friend. When you're striking, friction is your enemy. And so if you're trying to strike me, I'm going to try to create friction. I'm going to try to do everything I can to slow down your advance, to create you from creating more momentum, to smother you so that I don't have to worry about specific defenses against specific warheads. Now I'm creating incidental obstruction and patterns of deflection that are going to keep you from being able to rev it up.
Right.
But in that moment, I lost, and if it had been just him and me, I'd have gotten punched in the back of the head, kicked in the back of the head. Nobody really understood take the back and choke back then, not really.
Right.
So I could have been in great trouble if I'd been alone. Simply assuming that his wrist was going to feel like a wrist in the dojo, and I was going to take him down, and he was going to tap.
Right.
It was very, very. It was scary. Like I said, I had the willies because the after fact, the what if, just kept bugging, and the ego. The ego of a martial artist at 25, 26 who just failed, literally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We try to take nothing for granted, and we can't assume anything. We don't plan for the odds. We plan for the worst possible scenario. And there were a couple of times, like the last story I told you, where I had the fear of reality punched into me in a moment when I thought that I had considered every possible scenario. So, as I said, I was a bouncer at several bars. One of them was the Black Angus in Stockton, California. Now, Black Angus wasn't a steakhouse in Stockton. It was a huge biker bar and a cowboy bar, and just with a huge dance floor, DJs. And so us as doormen and bouncers, we dressed up as cowboys with a black bow tie and tuxedo shirt, jeans, and cowboy boots. And we had to escort drunks out and teach ladies how to line dance. So it was a whole thing. Yeah, it was part of the whole vibe of where we were. There was this couple that used to come in. They would argue a little. They'd leave. One night we were sweeping the parking lot after last call, and this couple was out there and they were fighting. And they were getting pretty loud. And I went over there. I said, it's time for everybody to go home, continue this later. And she goes, I'm not going home with him. And he's like, come on, Marie, we got to go home. And he grabbed her by the wrist with both hands. And he's like pulling her toward the car. And I'm like, man, they're a couple. I don't know where this is going. But she looked at me and she said, please help. So, of course, right? So I had no choice. At this point, she had declared her autonomy. And so I grabbed him by the shoulder and I said, Marie's not going home with you right now, pal. And he turned around to swing, and I knew I put myself in the position to where I could spin him into the choke. No matter what he did. That was what was going to happen next. I was going to push, pull, shoulder, shoulder, block up the naked, get him on the ground, and just squeeze. And it worked out perfectly because he was drunk. This was one of the things, just to digress a second, when I chose to do these jobs so that I could learn my craft after I'd gotten my black belt, part of the blessing was they were way too sloppy to execute what they thought they could do. So there were so many times when you could see, if you could keep your wherewithal about yourself, if you didn't flinch, if you didn't think, oh my God, this guy's hitting me, they're throwing a softball at you. You just have to maintain your wherewithal and see the staggering, the stuttering, and the ineffectiveness of what they're trying to do. So it was one of those kind of situations. So he wanted to turn around drunk. I spun him around. I put him in the chokehold. I sat on my ass. I sunk in my hooks. And as soon as I got on my butt, he says, help me, Marie, I don't want to die. And she starts smacking me on the back of the head, going, oh, let him go, you're hurting him. And I was like, motherfucker. And I let him go. And I said, I never want to see you guys around my bar again. If I ever do, and I laid out some really shitty stuff. I got nasty. I will rip off your head. I will fuck your neck hole until you bleed out. And I never want to see you assholes here again, ever. And that was the true story. And I thought, shit, again, if she'd had a brick, if she, whatever. If she had a gun, if she had it in her purse, suddenly she asked me to help. And then suddenly she was my enemy. And she was smacking me on the back of the head, like, let him go, you're hurting me.
No.
Anyway, I apologize for the F-bombs. That's reality. The reality is that I was very blessed in both the situations I've told you. One, I had backup, and they were right there. I did something stupid, but my backup had my back. And in the second one, I assumed that once a wife has changed her mind, she's changed her mind. But nope. She changed it right back again. And I could have been in serious trouble
Oh yeah.
because I assumed
Right.
that she was going to allow me to save her or rescue her.
Right.
And yeah, so that was pretty stark. That taught me a lot, that situation.
That is excellent. Thank you so much for that lesson. That it's really only people who have worked in that kind of force professional work that have experienced that. You hear a number of police officers who talk about those things, and it's not something that you really get to hear too often about. And I love that lesson, especially for all of the young men watching this, listening to this. That isn't something that is just crazy and that is unprecedented. That stuff can happen. Not only can it happen, you'd be surprised on how quickly you go from this person needs that save to she is now also an assailant against you, even though she pulled you into the situation. And just the amount of things that you get to know after. And it's one of the reasons I love this series. So, and perhaps we could do it where we ask you the questions as almost like a compare and contrast between the two, if you would, because we can go through those. I think both of them they're excellent lessons, and the things that you can kind of take from there not always necessarily going to be the same answer. Some might be the same answer. I don't know, but I think, oh my goodness, I love both of those stories. All right, so let's start off. There were 4 vantage point questions, and on your baseline. So before this event occurred, what was your general worldview? Did you feel safe in the world, or were you already a cautious person?
I think my mantra was just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. You know?
I love that.
so so I was a very cautious person because I was stepping into the uh the zone. I was
Mhm.
stepping into a place where I knew that things are going to happen. Yeah, and you never leave that. I get, and you as well.
Mhm.
Shifu Liu Changi, my feeding crane teacher, he always says to be a really great martial artist, you need a 10% crazy. I mentioned that when we were talking the other day. You and
Mhm.
I can't just sit there and eat our ramen. Everybody that
Right.
walks in that door is a potential assailant. And we understand that. And where are my weapons? Where are my allies? What could be a potential uncontrollable variable? How am I going to get to and that's what we do. So going into every thing, I and that's what made it so bad. I pride myself on not being surprised, on creating a situation where I am not going to be surprised. If I'm going to
Right.
lose, it's because I'm overwhelmed.
Right.
It's
Right.
because my tools, my weapon, were not competent for whatever
Right.
is happening. But it's never going to be that. What was that?
Right.
What was
Right.
that? One of my teachers told me a story about an old hayseed who would cut down trees. That's what he did for a living. And eventually he saved up enough money to buy one of those newfangled chainsaws. And so he goes in his local store, I want the best one you got, cut down the most trees I can. And so he buys the most expensive chainsaw. He goes home, comes back next day, throws that counter, go, want my money back. This thing ain't shit. Because I cut down more trees with an axe than I ever could with this thing. And the guy goes, well, we've never had to complain before. Let me see what's wrong. And he turns it on and starts it up. And the OSC goes, what was that?
Oh my God.
So, and so what he said was, you never get caught in one of those "what was that" moments.
Right.
Make sure you understand everything about the situation. So when that motor gets turned on, the last thing you want to do is be gasping. You know, but
Yeah.
so that what that means is, in both of those situations I expressed, I fucked up. I believed myself to have taken consideration of every potentiality,
Right.
and I was wrong with a
Right.
capital WR.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
that's the thing to take away. Both of them was overestimating my understanding of the totality of the situation.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. That's such an important one too, because the variables, whether you call them, the gifts that you don't see that they've handed you, or that X factor that kind of comes in. That's just it's so important to understand the amount of variables in play. That was excellent. So, in the environment, can you paint a picture of the setting? What were the sounds, the smells, and the vibe of the room or street where you were before things kind of shifted, and for both possibly?
Yeah, always that party vibe.
Mm.
The first situation is just a bar, just a bunch of people dancing, just a bunch of people, having a good time, and some people getting a little further on with their adult beverage than they should, and that happened all the time. Rarely did anybody ever, because even most drunks, aren't they know the consequences. The first thing I would ever say to anybody when they really started to like look like they were going to bristle was, so you decided to go to jail tonight. Irrespective of what you do to me or don't do to
Yeah,
me,
yeah, yeah.
you're going to jail tonight.
Right, right.
And that's like a huge litmus test.
Yeah.
If they don't consider that, then they're fucking drunk out their mind, or they're
Oh,
just looking for
absolutely.
an outlet to get in a fist fight. Sometimes it's so freaking stupid. One time we had a college kid bust out all the lights in the bathroom. For what? For nothing. He just wanted to, he was pissed off, he was drunk, and he just busted all the lights in the bathroom, kicked him out for
Wow.
life, waited for me outside in the parking lot with a couple of his friends. So you decided you don't just want to be kicked out of this bar forever. You want to go to jail tonight.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
insane. But he didn't. He just wanted to
Right.
kick my ass for not letting him back in the bar.
Right. Right.
And here's the third story for you, Buck. And this one's pretty important. This one's really important. Okay, so he's there. He's there with two of his buddies who weren't with the bar with him. He went and got these guys. They're just two guys, and they're standing back behind him. One of them's about my size. One of them is a lot taller, but he looks like a stick. It's like a beanpole.
Right.
I, so we're there in the parking lot, right? And it's the sweep. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
Right. Right. Yeah.
He went either for like a body takedown or a single leg takedown, but I saw his head drop out of sight. And so I immediately went to the sprawl, right? Textbook, both hands on the back of his neck, both feet down, boom. My right foot, because we wore cowboy boots, we were fucking cowboy bouncers.
Right. Right.
And so it slid, but it slid and it backed right
Mm.
up against the wheel of a car, right? So
Okay.
inadvertent position advantage.
Right.
Boom, it stopped me right there.
Right.
It stopped me in that kind of an angle. And he fell. He lost control of my leg and he fell
There you
onto
go.
both
Okay.
hands. And in that moment, I heard a voice very loud in my head say, "On his hand." And I fucking did, like a flamenco. Like I said, you look like a flamenco dancer. I just boom, and I stomped on his hand as
Wow.
hard as I could, and he
Right.
screamed. It wasn't the top of his lungs; it was really close.
Wow.
And his two buddies, like, dude, we didn't know. He just didn't want to come talk to you. We had no idea, dude. He didn't say no. We didn't know fucking shit was gonna go down. It was that kind of
Right.
thing. They were
Right.
immediately
Yeah.
we had no idea. We thought he was gonna come and say sorry or something.
Right.
I don't know if they did or not. They certainly weren't engaging.
Right.
They certainly
Yeah.
weren't engaging.
Yeah.
And I said, pick him up, take him out of here, because otherwise you got about 4 minutes before the cops are here.
Right. Right. Wow.
But what I realized in that moment was the nature of the deterrent. Right.
Right.
One time I was walking past the living room, my wife was watching Reacher, Jack Reacher,
Mhm.
right? And he's on the bridge, and the guy says it's 5 against 1, and he
Right.
says
Right.
no, it's 3 against 1.
Right.
The last
Right.
two always run,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I laughed because I was walking through the living room as that was playing on the TV, and I said, "Man, he's been reading my mail." But what the fact of the matter is that deterrent
Yep.
has got to
Yep.
be catastrophic.
Right.
One of my favorite shows is Rick and Morty. And there's one episode of Rick and Morty where he's in the White House talking to the president, and there's all these Secret Service men around him. And the president says, "Seize him." And he says, "Don't touch me. If you touch me, you'll die." And I'm talking about dead. I'm saying there's nothing afterwards. No matter what you believe, you're going dark. And the Secret Service man grabs him, and he immediately dies. And the president says, "Oh my God, what did you do?" Because, "Well, I told him." Because, "But couldn't you have just knocked him out?" Because everybody wants to be knocked out.
Right.
Nobody's afraid of that, and that's the message I want to give with this. If there are two, if there are three,
Right.
you have to make that first defensive salvo catastrophic.
Right.
If you can create blood-curdling shouts or anything like "fuck my knee" or "oh god damn it" or
Right.
anything like that,
Yeah.
anybody but the most psychotic are going to respond.
Right.
And there's
Right.
your other litmus test. What is
Right.
it? We have an expression in Feeding Crane: kill the rooster to warn the monkey. Kill the rooster to warn the monkey.
Right.
Now, in a multiple attack situation, every monkey that doesn't have the sense of a monkey is a rooster.
Right.
If they're going to watch you sit there and try to snatch somebody's eye out or bite their lip off or just do something or stomp on their hand or just do something that is so uh, socially unacceptable,
Right.
they're either going to back off. Oh, no, we didn't know, dude. We didn't know.
Right.
We're
Right.
cool. We're cool. Or
Yep.
they're going to attack. And if they attack,
Absolutely.
they're fucking roosters.
Right.
And
Yep.
Ikeni Satsu, one blow, one victory, one blow, one victory. You know? So
Right.
get that into your martial arts mentality, folks. If
That
you
is
ever
such good
have
advice.
to manage multiple assailants, make
Right.
that first one so devastating that nobody wants to risk it. You know?
Absolutely.
I remember one time I was standing somebody down in front of the hospital. And we stood there in that uncomfortable moment forever. And then he backed down and he walked away. And I went back, and one of my buddies, one of my partners, one of my coworkers, he said, "I know why they always back down around you, because they know we all know karate, but they know you know crazy."
Crazy.
And that, you know,
Yeah.
that pheromone.
Right.
I'm getting home to
Absolutely.
my daughter. Shit,
Yep.
I've only had her for a year and a half. You think you're going to do something
Right.
that's going to make me not get home to my daughter?
Right. No.
And cowards like dogs, they can smell intent. They can smell fear,
Right.
but they can smell resolve.
Right.
You know, if you know, and I don't want to, but God damn it, if I have to,
Right.
if this is going down, you're
Right.
in my world now.
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
so it's always a positive response to that if it's real.
Right.
I imagine a coward and a dog can also smell a phony.
Right.
You know, you've got to know what you're going to do going in there.
Yeah.
What you're willing to do.
Absolutely. There's so many good points in that whole thing in that one question. There's so many fantastic points, and it's so true with the group monkey dance mentality and the status seeking show, and the amount of that transformative from the immediate. I don't want that to happen to me, especially if it's just that egregious level. And especially the hands, oh my goodness. Especially if it's the right hand and he's right-handed. And that's such a good tactic too, because you're not
I don't even remember which
doing
hand it
much
was, but
then.
he was fucked. Yeah,
That,
it was great. It was in a moment of inspiration, because I mentioned this in the video before. When I was surprised, the 2 or 3 times when somebody went boom, I always kind of felt out of body. I felt like, oh shit, that was good. You know, it happened, and then I'd recognize that it happened. I never in the moment was like, I gotta do this, I gotta do this, I gotta be here. It was never like, huh? Wow, you know,
right,
wow. The dead dude that I bodyguarded for, the first time I ever felt that, I was with him. I was his bodyguard. He was with another Glenn Turner, was another big individual marketer, and he was visiting. And when he got drunk, he got very violent. And I was backed up against a Cadillac, just standing there one night, and Rick and Glenn are talking. And Glenn was like, "So you're his bodyguard?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, Michael he's like a 5th degree black belt taekwondo." This was makeup shit. You know, he had no idea what my actual credentials were, but he liked me and he'd
right,
seen me fight. So Glenn is like looking at me, and Glenn's a big man, and he's like starting to get close to me, and I'm just leaning up against the hood of the Cadillac. And Rick's like, "No, Glenn, don't, Glenn, don't." And it started getting louder and more aggressive, and Glenn lunged at me. And all I remember was Rick going, "Glenn, don't!" And then I remember a blur, and I'm standing outside looking at Glenn's ass, and Glenn is leaning over the hood of the Cadillac, and he kind of knocked the wind out of himself as he hit it. So somehow I got out of the way.
right,
And I spent a lot of time thinking about what happened there. Did he push me? Did I fall? Was it an accident? Was it an incident? As I grew older in those situations and in Kumite or in like rolling, I was able to see that. I was able to like eventually watch it and go, okay, I'm doing this right now. That's very, very cool, because I thought about doing this, it'd be too late and I'd be fucking hit, you know? And so I always appreciated that kind of strange out of body feeling. In fact, in my video, I asked, have anybody else felt that? Has anybody else given you this sense that they didn't seem to be there at the time?
Right. That's awesome. I've never actually had
Have you ever heard that?
out of body one. No, I had, so the first time I was jumping, it was two kids, and actually I never thought I would end up doing Grip of Death from Parker's, but he put me in a side headlock, and Grip of Death is the second headlock where you hammer fist to the groin and hammer fist to the back of the kidney, and then your left knee goes into the back of their right knee, but you do those all at the same time from a sideways headlock, and I did it so hard and so fast, instantly without thinking about it, because we just drilled it and drilled it and drilled it, that the person he came up with just stopped in his tracks. And I never thought about that actually being an attack. What he did is he jumped up over top, grabbed me, and then he spun. And all I saw was this guy walking up, and I thought he was going to just kick through his friend's headlock right there in the head. And I dropped him, and immediately from that point, his buddy's eyes just popped up out of his head. And my eyes were popped out of my head, and I just looking up at him, and I just booked it. And I was like, holy crap. But it came out, and he immediately had the status of that in his mind, because his friend was screaming, holding his groin. And I was shocked as hell too. And this probably happens in 1.5 seconds before I'm running. And it stops his action and his action, and it was all over. And I thought about that moment for like a month straight every night, going, holy crap, I got attacked. And I just instantly.
Thank you, Ed Parker.
Thank you, Ed Parker. Yes, and yeah, Ed Parker and Dad for making me go all the time, because I wanted
not just
to,
Dad for making you go, but Dad for having that mentality of a warrior. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but let's talk about Dad for a minute.
Yeah.
Lots of people go through those same training programs and never. One of the most neglected aspects of any martial arts studio that I've seen throughout my entire life is keeping it real. And I don't mean keeping it real with all pressure testing, keeping it in their mind, not being afraid to turn these people's minds into somebody that can manage violence, defend themselves, and return violence with violence. They can become violence. They can embrace the violence. And your dad did that.
Yeah.
My father's best friend was a Vietnam vet, and he'd had a horrible. One of his stories at 19 was he carried his dead friend for 2 miles because he knew he was dead, but he didn't want the Kong to get him, because they told him such horrible things about what they would do to his body, how they would desecrate it, how they would rape it, and then put it on a stick and burn it or whatever. So he literally had to carry his dead friend back to camp. And one time I made a joke about, but it was only the North Vietnamese that were the enemy, right? Because if they didn't have round eyes, It's just, and he would tell the most horrific stories. But when I became a teenager, he started to open up a little more to me, because I'd known him since I was a child. He was my father's best friend. And so I started asking him stories about, Vietnam, about situations. I would see things on TV, and then I would ask him, did you ever do anything like that? The Kerry thing where they put everybody in the hole and they kill them all. And then I would start giving him scenarios. I go, okay, so you're going over here, and there's a hut over there, and there's a cave over there. And he would play with me, and he would go, all right, so what's my recon? What do I know? What do I know? What happened to the last group that came in here? Are we the first? What's happened here? And it would be that kind of questioning until I would get into the door of the hut or to the hatch in the ground or whatever. And then everything would be reduced to 1-syllable responses. Yup. Nope. Bang. Yup. Nope. Bang. And and I would hear his voice when in those situations. One time I did a preemptive strike. I smacked a guy in the eye with what we call a snapping limb. I was sitting back down in his chair, and I heard George's voice in my head go bang when I threw that punch. Okay, no, don't take any time at all to reconsider this. Yep, no bang time. And I learned so much from that mentality. That if I just come out just like you, if we just come out as black belts, we wouldn't have been survivable in the situations that we had to encounter.
No,
that we had thrust upon us.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. And especially having that time and consideration there too. You commit to this is over when I'm no longer under attack, and committing to the level of violence that is necessary to stop the threat. Because I think way too many people get into a situation and they have a second guessing, or they have the, maybe is that too much. It's the difference between checking if you have stopped the threat and pulling back on the level of force that you're using once it's gone there. Once it's gone there, you have to commit that level of violence and keep it until it is done. Then once you're done, great. But you'll see a number of people end up losing, but end up surviving by getting rocked and hospitalized because they stopped that level of force that took it there in the first place. And that other person took advantage of that because, well, you brought this level of violence and then you backed it down. And now you're going to the ER, and it's so many fantastic lessons from that one there. All right, so we have this with the red flags. Ready? In hindsight, were there quiet warning signs about those two, and a look in someone's eye or a change in the air that your brain noticed, but your logic ignored?
In the first one, I plead ignorance. Every 25-year-old is some version of an idiot. And so, in hindsight, there was not enough information that I had prior to have realized that.
Right.
Afterwards, absolutely. That was, what do they say? In school, you learn the lesson, then take the test. In life, you take the test and then learn the lesson.
Right.
And so that was that. In the second one, absolutely. I knew my father had told me just in passing, don't ever get between a wife and husband. No matter what's going on, don't ever get. So absolutely, I took way too much for granted. I could very easily have turned him into that choke standing.
Right.
I could have very easily have turned him into a car standing and never have taken my eyes off of her. And I could very easily have said, what do you want to do right now, Maria? You want me to put him in the car? Do you want to call the police? What are you going to do? I could have very well continued to engage because he was a manipulatable drunk.
Right.
And that's something that if people are in that situation, I don't care if it's a job or not, if you're in a bar with your wife or with your husband or with your partner of any kind, and a drunk is starting to move, track that movement, attach, adhere, and follow. It won't be as quick as you're afraid it's going to be. And manage it appropriately. Put things in front of them that they're going to trip over. But
absolutely.
In that situation, it would have been, I could have. In hindsight, I could have handled it more maturely. I handled it macho. I could choke the motherfucker out, lay him on the ground. I was sitting down because I didn't want to bounce his head off the ground when he passed out. I wanted that just 3 inches off me, slide him off me, stand up.
Right.
So yeah, everything was about. I have a saying that I teach every bully. An insult has never started a fight. An ego often has.
Right.
And
that's excellent.
Ego that made me take that extra step to show exactly how superior I was to him.
Right.
And it was stupid.
Right.
It was real stupid.
Yeah. Excellent.
Got to cure drugs and idiots, and I was never drunk at work.
Right. That's so many fantastic points across the board on all of these. I love the amount of lessons that you share just in all of these, and I want to come back to that as well, and talk about, as you know, I'm a fan of your Every Bully and everything. I've done that a couple times on our channel and talking about those. So when here in this with the shift, and you describe the exact second that the social mask fell off, when you realized that this was a violent reality, what did that transition feel like to you physically?
Really? The very first time I realized the world was ugly and I needed to be a martial artist?
Well, so in this particular, or that too, I mean, yes, we'll go answer those, but pertain usually to these situations. But if you have a lesson you'd like to share with that as well, we'd love to hear it.
So when I was 8 years old, I had my first day of parochial school. Blessed Sacrament, Hollywood, California, huge Catholic school. And I was dropped off by the bus my first day of school with my sister, who was 3 grades ahead of me, and she, of course, obviously left me in the schoolyard. I went to play. There was a commotion. It was about probably 10 minutes before the bell, and there was a commotion, and people were gathering. Kids were gathering in one part of this schoolyard. which is all concrete. It's an asphalt jungle. It's Hollywood. It's on Sunset Boulevard. And so I made my way there, my very first day of school. And just like in a movie, I kind of weaved my way through the bigger kids to
Right.
get to the front to see what was happening. And there were these two kids, looked like my age, didn't look like they were much older. And one was an African American, and one was a Caucasian. And they were just squared up. As I recall looking at them, they were just standing there, squared up with each other. And the crowd of parochial schoolboys started to chant, a fight, a fight, the N-word and a white. Of course, they didn't say the N-word.
Right,
They said
right,
the N-word.
right.
And they were just chanting, a fight, the N-word and a white, a fight. And and my father had taught me that you never say that. You never call anybody a colored boy, and you never say that. Ever, ever, ever. Ugliest things you can do to a human being. He taught me that. And so I'm stunned. And I'm listening to this, and immediately my heart goes out to this kid, and I'm thinking he's fighting two fights.
Right.
You know, he's got to listen to this and be embarrassed or hated or whatever. I don't even know what went through my mind, but I empathized with him.
Right.
And of course, the fight was over before it began. A couple of the nuns, the penguins came out and just broke them up, and everybody scattered and went to class. They never actually punched at each other. They just stood there looking at each other.
Wow.
I hated that.
Wow.
So later that week, probably 2 days later, I'm sitting on my porch reading a comic book. And my neighbor, who's a Chinese woman who we called Miriam Milwaukee. And I hate the fact that we always did that with Asians. We always changed their names. And they didn't mind. They just let it happen. You know, it might have been Milwaukee, or whatever. But we called her Milwaukee, Miriam Milwaukee, like the city. And she walked past me. She goes, "Hi, Michael. Oh, you like comic books?" I said, "Do you like the Green Hornet?" I said, "I don't know what that is." I said, "Oh, you've never seen it? Oh, it's a TV show." And she started telling me a little bit about it. She goes, "If you like comic books, you'll love the Green Hornet. So if you want, I'll ask your parents if you can come over to my house on Thursday and watch it." So she did, walked over to my house, asked my mom and dad, could I go over there and watch it? And I think it was on the same time as Hogan's Heroes. So I was kind of stoked to be able to do something different.
Right.
And remember, there's only 2 days after the most traumatic event of my life to that point. I mean, it scarred me. I didn't know what to think about Catholic school, about people in general, about anything. So I'm sitting there in front of the TV, and I'm cross-legged in front of the TV, and she's sitting behind me on a chair. And when Bruce Lee comes on, she turns my head to the screen, and she says, "That's Bruce Lee." She goes, "That's Kung Fu. That's Chinese Kung Fu." And I watched this little guy kick the shit out of the bully. I watched him beat up the bad guy. And that's what I want with the rest of my life. My dad asked me what I wanted for Christmas. I said Kung Fu lessons. And he didn't know if it was cooking. He didn't know if it was dance. He'd never heard of Kung Fu before, you know. I said, "I want Kung Fu lessons. That's what I want." And so he found it. He was my dad. He found a studio that in Hollywood that would take me when I was 10. So I sat there because we went and they're going, "We don't take children. You know, we don't accept." And it was just two brothers, hippie era kind of brothers, and it was a rough class. It was all grown ups, and it was rough. We worked out on terrazzo, you know, like really slick floor, like a garage, and he would put dancer's wax down on it so that if you didn't hold your stances, you did splits, you'd fall. It was incredibly bizarre. But we went there and he's like, "We don't take kids. This is not that kind of, you know, martial arts studio. Maybe you want to try Chuck Norris. Maybe you want to try this." And he saw I started to like well up. I'm like 9 years old. And I started to like quiver at the lip. And he goes, how old are you? And I said, "I'm 9. I'll be 10, you know, in April." He goes, "I'll tell you what, if you come and watch the classes, come and sit there. Don't make any noise. I don't even want to know you're here. But if you watch the classes and you know exactly what's going on, then when you're 10, we'll talk about it." You know, and that's exactly what I did. I saw the most amazing things. My eyes so wide, so amazed. And then when I was 10, they took me in, you know, and I started training. It was insane.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So that's
I love
why,
that.
because I knew the world was ugly from the moment I stepped out of that schoolyard, and I
Yeah,
knew that the weak had to be defended.
right. That's well, I love that story too. That's excellent. And you know that, wow. You know, especially with people like coming from Bruce Lee and everything he did. And I mean, mine, of course, I had seen it, but I always loved David Carradine and the show Kung Fu, and that was, essential from that time. And alrighty, so
Yes.
yeah,
Oh, it vindicated me. Shit,
right,
in school, nobody knew what I was talking about.
right,
Nobody,
yeah,
I'd say, I take Kung Fu. And they're like, what? Like, oh, this is a judo chop. This is a karate chop. But what's a
right,
Kung Fu
right,
chop? And then that show showed up. And
right,
like suddenly everybody knew what I was doing. It was really,
right.
I loved what
That's
show.
awesome.
There have been
Right.
very few shows, in my humble opinion. I can think of uh, three. Highway to Heaven, Touched by an Angel, and Kung Fu. Their whole
Mm-hmm.
purpose was whether you're dogmatic, whether you believe in whatever, those three tried to make messages out of every week,
Right,
period.
right.
Every week was a wonderful message in life.
Absolutely, and they're all fantastic. But yes, it's one of those things from the cultural icons and the way that they brought it was just pretty beautiful. And a lot of shows would try to bring messages like that, but you know, yes, especially with David Carradine, it was amazing. All right, so
That was
for
insane.
these
Greatest show ever.
show,
First two seasons, at least. But
right? How many seasons are there?
they're three, but it went commercial at the end. It lost its steam and it started doing
Right,
goofy
right.
stuff.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
have to go back and have to go back. It's been some time since I've seen them. To go back and try to
well,
rewatch them. So we have the sensory tunnel. So people who often report auditory exclusion or tachyspasia, where the time just slows down. And I know you talked about this with yours and having that body experience there. What happened to your senses in the heat of the moment outside of what you've already mentioned?
yeah, yeah. Okay, so it's kind of when you mentioned the reason you were able to pull off that technique was because you'd had so many repetitions, right? So many repetitions. If this is kind of what I come to realize about, well, I didn't know what was going on. It was just happening. It was just happening. My brain, my cognitive resources weren't quick enough to catch it in the moment. I had to
Right,
catch it on the replay.
right.
But there are three things that will take you from alpha brain to beta brain.
Mm,
There are three circumstances that will take you from da 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 to what was that, right? Or what is that? From driving your car after 20 years, you're making no mistakes. You're driving your car after 20 years, you're perfectly in zen. But somebody comes a half an inch into that lane, boom, you're immediately
right.
into a beta mode, right? There are three things that will take you from alpha to beta. One, something that is peculiar. Two, something that is problematic. Three, something that is familiar. You decide you want to buy a purple hybrid because there are no purple hybrids on the road in your neck of the woods and you want to be unique. The second you drive off the lot, you're seeing purple fucking hybrids everywhere. Everybody didn't buy them with you, but suddenly your beta brain recognizes the familiar. Of those three things, of those three conditions that will cause you to hyper focus, to get into the place, right? To get into the place, present, locked in, aggressive, all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Of those three, only one of them will take you into the moment in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be peculiar. If it's peculiar, you got to decide if it's problematic. Hey, it's
Right,
a
right,
bird carrying a painting across the sky. Is that
right,
going to be a
right.
problem?
Yeah,
I can dismiss it.
right,
Two, if it's problematic, you have to determine a plan of action. And that's what we're talking about in that moment. Is there going to be time to determine a plan of action? The
right.
only one that will take you into the moment immediately is familiar. Is
Mm,
familiar. Your brain, your myelin sheaths, everything that you've trained will respond efficiently if it recognizes. It recognizes. If what is happening is familiar. When I teach wrist locks, I teach no, nobody's going to come up and grab you by the wrist. Nobody's
right,
going to come up and
right.
cross hand grab you.
Yeah.
But in the moment of the battle, in the scrum, you get smashed up against a wall. They go 2-on-1. You recognize it. Something happens in that position that you've trained 1,000 times, 1,000 times to take that, to take that headlock. Now, in the moment, you recognize it. I've been here. You recognize it on a what we call muscle memory, the myelin sheaths, those things that you've trained until they're all covered in white. That's the thing. If it's familiar, you don't have time to explore it in the moment. It will always seem like an afterthought. The sparring's different. Sparring is that, in the zone. It is. I'm seeing beach balls come at me. I can grab that leg and sweep you. But then they're on the same day, same speed, and you get clocked. That's a funky phenomenon of being in the zone, but attaching to something that you've agreed to. That makes a whole difference. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that makes a whole difference. So in situations, even in very competitive, full contact fighting situations, I have had a sense of time slowing down. I do. In sparring, whether it's like a tournament or whatever, if I'm locked in, if I'm attached, if I adhere, and if I'm following completely, it feels like beach balls coming at me. It feels like I can manage any speed, any level, anything. It feels like time really does slow down. But I've never felt that in an unsanctioned bout.
That's awesome. And that's on the first part in describing there in Bader Meinhof and that recognizing of everything on the purple car. And I love that, especially with this, because I almost always when I have to explain something, I love how you go straight into the point and the lesson. I have to say, Bader Meinhof, you are going in and just expressing it. That was very, very well put. I love that so much. And so much of that in the brain. It's just so true. I've never heard the beach ball analogy before, but I love that too, because indeed having that thing at you and your eyes constricting and dilating as they will from, that part of your brain kicking on in the survival mode. It's very, very well put, sir.
That analogy I got from, I can't remember, it might have been Reggie Jackson, but it was some slugger from back in the day. He said, man, when I'm in the zone, it looks like a beach ball. When I'm not, it looks like an aspirin. When I'm not in the zone, it looks like an aspirin. When I am in the zone, it looks like a beach ball.
So the internal dialogue, what was the very first coherent thought that you had when you realized you were in danger? What calculation was a prayer or a command? So in your two situations there where you had those attacks, what was the first coherent thought you had?
What the fuck just happened?
That's nice.
That's the first coherent thought I had. Let's rewind that and see what the fuck just happened. What just happened? I have no idea what just happened. And I'm being honest. That's why I always use the God takes care of drunks and idiots. One time, a dude pulled me up by my collar, and I inadvertently headbutted him right in the middle of his nose and ended that confrontation. And both of my colleagues were convinced that I orchestrated that. That was, God damn it, that was amazing. He put like a bowling ball right into his head. Literally, I was caught completely by surprise. My body was moving like a rag doll. Exactly. And it was just the natural body response of getting pulled forward and jerked back. And he did not recognize that we were that close.
Wow.
So, there were a couple of those situations where I had, at the Black Angus specifically, I had an incredible reputation of being an untouchable martial artist. And it was all bullshit. It was all true story. So one of my coworkers was Baxter Dunn. Baxter Dunn was a football player for the UOP, University of Pacific, but then he tore his shoulder. He was a linebacker and he tore his shoulder. So he'd had major surgery. So he was no longer, playing football, but he looked like Dolph Lundgren. He was ripped to shreds. He was about 6'2". And we would play because he was a green belt in Kempo. And so we would, in the break room or whatever, we would play, we would spar. And we were sparring one night in the break room, and I threw a jump spinning crescent kick. And my jump spinning crescent kick landed on his shoulder and got stuck there. And so I had one foot on the ground, one foot on his shoulder. So I just reached around behind his neck to hold myself up. Literally, I just did not want to fall into the table. So I reached around behind his neck and inadvertently, wholly by accident, my thumb hit the brachial mandibular angle here, the pressure point. It just locked onto it. So I had him by the back of the neck, and my thumb hit that pressure point by accident. And I don't know if it's because he was muscle bound. I don't know what the situation was. He was thick everywhere. He was really thick. But it instantly short circuited him. And so he's standing there with one leg on his shoulder, my other hand wrapped around his neck, and he starts to spasm like a seizure. And he starts to shake, and he falls to his knees. And my leg slides off his shoulder, right? And I'm standing there like, Baxter, are you all right? Are you ready? He goes, yeah. He goes, whoa. And so we went to work and shit. So the next day I come into work. It's probably about 15 minutes before our shift. And Baxter has got everybody there, the bartenders, the waiters. And he's like, and then he took his thumb and he paralyzed me. And I was like, wow, this is how legends are born. This was 100% a stupid mistake. After I threw a stupid kick against somebody who was way taller than me, and I was just trying not to bang my head on the table. Unbelievable. But then everybody thought I was a master of pressure points. Dim Mak, Count Dante, and it literally, and this is a true story that literally fucking happened. And I had nothing to do with it.
Wow.
Literally, awesome. There was no forethought. There was no planning. Even as he was falling, I wasn't thinking of the next move. I just watched him fall to his knees, and then my leg just kind of slid off his shoulder as I was just watching and worried that he might have been having a seizure or something, Like maybe I kicked him in the neck when my foot landed up there.
Yeah.
But he said it was that pressure in the back of his ear. Paralyzed him. That's a very fascinating pressure point. Are you familiar with the application of that?
I usually use it in the back of the mastoid process here. On the other side.
Right there.
Right there.
Yeah. And the key to that is you have to apply pressure in the right direction. So you can't push forward, you can't push in. You've got to apply the pressure directly toward the tip of the nose. So you're kind of like trying to go at an angle, trying to push as if you had a knitting needle. You want to push it in here, and you want it to come out the tip of their nose. But the fascinating thing about that pressure point, I learned it in international dynamic systems. So when I would do COP seminars, when I demonstrate that pressure point, did I tell you this story already? I would grab the biggest volunteer, and I would have them sit in a chair. And I would have them grab the sides of the chair with both hands. And then I would take this knuckle, because I have a pretty long thumbnail, I didn't want to scratch them. So I'd take this knuckle, and I would stand behind them. I would cup the chin, and I would put the thumb back there. And I would say, now, don't stand up unless you absolutely have to. I want you to not stand up. I would have them holding onto the edge of the chair. Then, simultaneously, I would zap the pressure point, and I would shout, stand up! Just as hard as I could, as fast as I could at the same time. 8 out of 10 of them, boom, immediately jump up. And 2 out of 10, holding that seat, because pressure points technically usually only work on about 7 or 8 out of 10 people. So I would do that. And then I would explain they didn't stand up because of the pain, although it does hurt.
Right.
They stood up. And I had a neuroscientist explain this to me. When you hit that pressure point, for lack of a better term, it causes kind of a brainstem vibration, right? And in that moment of disruption, anything that the brain hears, it perceives to be internal. So it thinks it said it itself. It's kind of like a during hypnotic suggestion as opposed to post. So any command that's short and understandable in their language will be thought of by themselves. So if you say, stand up, back off, let go, anything like that, it's likely to happen. It's likely to happen because they don't know they didn't think it up themselves. Now, like any pressure point, when I teach pressure points, I teach, think of the body as a thermometer, right? When the rage level gets up to here, pressure points start to go away. And by the time it gets up to here, ain't no compliant move. I don't care if it's joint locks, whatever. They're going to beat you to death with the arm you just ripped off of them, until they pass out. Because once the rage gets to here, or not even rage, if they're squared up. If you ever, who Xu Xiaodong is? Xu Xiaodong is that Chinese kickboxer who just kicked the shit out of all the Tai Chi and Kung Fu masters. Just cut a swath through them, beating up Tai Chi masters that really thought that they knew how to fight.
Hmm.
And he did so much of it that the Chinese government kind of blackballed him. They kind of, they canceled him. They took away his credit
Hmm.
status. He couldn't ride on trains. They made it to where it was illegal for him to compete unless he wore a mask or makeup.
Wow.
And yeah, but he beat up a lot of kung fu masters that really thought that those sticky things were going to work once somebody was all adrenaline filled.
Right. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
and it doesn't. It
Right.
doesn't.
We were talking about that with PPCT and going over those things, and that there were a room that would not work, and that it was one of those things that depended. Of course, they also, when talking about those, would talk about how it totally depends also on what this person's on. If they're on PCP, you're not doing a whole bunch of the very, very specific things that you have to do that is very, very, very violent versus, somebody who is just being a drunk or being in that type of a thing. And pain compliance is always such a fickle model because you don't know who you have. And this is why the military and the police, they all want as much intel, like you were talking about with recon. You have to have information to be able to know things like that. And it's always after that you find out, okay, this is what would have worked. This is what, it could have done, and that's one of the reasons why nobody really likes that with lawyers is because, unless they're winning for you and defending you, they have all the time in the world to talk about the million what ifs. And when you're in there and have split seconds to be able to decide, well, this is what I'm doing. And, that stuff is always so difficult. Although there's a good amount of it, job, whether it's detaining or even just stopping somebody. I think it's important that, especially for most martial artists, a lot of people will go through that kind of a training. And I think it's important. I always talk about this with the story of Bob's your uncle. And it's just a silly thing I made up. I always say, Uncle Bob goes to a wedding and you're there and he starts getting drunk and belligerent and you got to take him out. Well, the first couple guys to go take him out, he starts swinging on and hurting people. And so you get up to go remove your uncle, but you're not going to, what we always talk about with violence of action. I'm not going to violence of action or cripple my uncle. So I would probably be using pressure points. I would be trying to hook up into him and try to take my uncle out of the thing because I don't want to hurt Uncle Bob, but I might have to. And so those types of applications, I think, because everybody, especially across the internet, I know you always see it too, is all the wonderful commenters we have about what's BS and what isn't, who've never experienced anything but a keyboard, and they have this idea that everything has to be, the Muay Thai hard and fast, and this is the only thing that'll ever work, where that context is completely removed because the mugger I'm doing a whole different thing to than Uncle Bob at my sister's wedding, who I'm not trying to slam his head into the wall. And those types of things are perfect, especially for that, if they work. But as you said, very, very well, depending on the adrenalized state and so much of what's going on with Uncle Bob.
But as you said very well, you need to have those in your arsenal. Like I
Right.
said, the reason I started teaching cops wasn't because I like cops, because if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail,
That's looking like a nail. Yeah.
and you've got to give them. So when I first started teaching the cops, the prosecutor was very nouveau. It was a PR-24, which is basically the side handle baton. It's a tonfa, right?
Okay.
But it's a PR-24 was the first police issued side handle baton, and they called it the prosecutor. And so I was teaching a workshop on this weapon, and one of the senior officers. I mean, this guy been on the force for a while. He was a captain. And he said, maybe you can help me because we had this situation like, I think a week ago. He says, so me and my partner, we were called to the mall for a disturbance. There was a guy, he was drunk, he was on drugs, he was something, he was really messed up. And so my partner went to apprehend him and he started wrestling with my partner. And he's wrestling around on the floor there in the mall and they're rolling back and forth. Then I see that he's starting to get his hand near the gun belt. So I started to worry. So when they roll and he's on top, I take my, prosecutor and I whack him on the back of the head. And nothing happens. And so I whack him on the back of the head harder. And I'm thinking, shit, if I hit this guy again, I'm going to kill him.
Kill him.
But
Right.
he's not stopping. And
Right.
so as soon as I go to whack him a third time, he sits up, he grabs his head, and he says, "You broke my fucking skull." And then he passed out. And I'm listening to this story. Like I'm 26, 27 years old. I listen to the story. And then he looks at me and he goes, "What would you have done?" and so So I pried the guy off. So I took the prosecutor, used it in the third arm. I got it up underneath the jawline. I got my arm wrapped around the other side of it. I used it to pry him over. Now I've got him in a perfect strangle. With one side of the prosecutor on one side, my arm on the other side. I can do whatever I want with it. You know? And so I just pulled him off. It doesn't matter if he's feeling the pain. There are all kinds of compliance. You know, you can work on structurally weak places. You can work on neurodisrupted places. Or you can work on places that articulate the body, and you know they're going to make the body move in a certain way every single time. And so using this stick to be able to create that lever, to be able to crank that bulldog and pull this guy off without busting his skull was like, it was mind-boggling to them. They never considered that they could use. So I showed them how to use it. Not to hit people, but to lock up arms, to go into Americanas, to go into, hammer locks, to do a choke, to do compliant restraints that can always escalate. I showed them how to use it against a bladed weapon. Like Angel Caballas would always show us, he would call it abanico, fanning, and just staying out of range and whacking that wrist. Not even encountering the dude, not even going for a target. The target, but the target is the warhead. The target is the wrist. And I stay out of range and I whack at that wrist and I get one good shot and you're going to drop that weapon. And so, the only time I taught them to strike like radial nerves, different nerves, but not the head. And use, tactics like that. But that's true. If you only have one thing, you're a danger. That's why we're doing the gun workshops. That's why we're doing the gun video.
Yeah, absolutely.
To try to make the world a tiny bit safer, even if we're not there.
Absolutely. I think and more education you have and more you have in your arsenal overall is just better you have, because having all of those options, especially when you get back into your prefrontal cortex and that cognizant section of your mind, okay, what do I do? I love that about how you're talking about that with the lock too, because there's probably good, 20, 30 techniques at Brown Belt and Parker's Kempo where he manipulates the head via the neck. Now, this is all standing, of course. And my father did a very similar thing with his school that Jeff Speakman did with grappling. So we all had all kinds of grappling and dragonfly. But Parker was a big fan of the chin, top of the forehead. And what he would do is he would strike up on it. But instead of just striking, he would manipulate it via the chin or the top of the head, and wherever the head goes, the body just follows. And so you can just completely spin somebody around. And I remember showing that to a number of people because I was like, I can make you sit down facing that way, even if you don't want to. And it's very simple. You can almost do it with one hand. If they're bigger, it takes two, but just by the chin, the top of the head, and you spin, and not to crank the neck or break it or anything, but just to spin and move them. And the whole body will just, even if they're trying to resist, neck does not have enough power, and even if they're grabbing onto you with your stance and your roots, does not have enough power to stop you from just spinning them completely the other way. And I loved all of those.
It's more effective. It's more effective than probably most people even consider it could possibly be. It's easy to make, and part of the reason is that on some level their body wants to comply. It's trying to comply. Once you start stretching those pain sensors around, around the vagus nerve and around the mastoid, your body's, I want to fix that. I got to fix that. I got to right myself. I got to correct it. So they're going with you because they need to. No matter how much you try to resist, you're not going to be able to resist.
And the spinal cord is there too. There's so much of that is, very centrally located that, yes, it absolutely wants to not, die, and your subconscious trying to keep you alive. So I think
trying to keep you alive and balance.
Yes, and balance, especially
to keep you in some kind of
Why the mastoid's so effective too with the equilibrium. Absolutely. Yeah.
And being able to fuck with that, understanding it is can be really efficient in the correct circumstance. It's not something you can reach out there and decide to do. But if you recognize the moment where it will be efficient, you can do a serial transition to something that is efficient. Yeah, and the brain, fucking with the brain. One of the things I would do, I don't know how efficient this is in translation to reality, but it was always fun to do that. I'd have people hold their arms straight out, and then I would push down on the top of it. Right? Now hold your arm straight out. Don't let me push down. Right? Just push down top. Push down top. And good strong guys, I couldn't push their arm down. Right. But then let's see if we can see this. I would put my hand on the top, but then just put my thumb on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And now all of a sudden they're having problems holding their arm up. And they say, well, you're squeezing. So then I would put one hand on top and then just take my other hand and place it gently on the bottom this way. No pressure, just place it gently like this. And I would just push their arm down with no problem whatsoever. And the reason is I'm giving the brain more things to think about than one direction. If when you just put your hand on top of something and you start pressing down, the
Right.
brain knows where the pressure is, the brain knows the direction of the force, the brain knows everything, it can resist. But if you even tickle the underside of that arm, at every single step, that brain has to go, is it still pushing up? It's still pushing up. I feel something under. I feel something under.
Right.
And so it's having to adjust and disregard that something's being touching it underneath at every moment.
Right.
So now, if I feel with every part of my body like it was the belly of a serpent, if I'm not just trying to take two fingers and twist your wrist, but I've got my whole arm around your entire radius, and I'm using the whole back of my hand to cut the whole, or the whole palm of my hand to cut the whole back of your hand, that's giving your brain a lot more to think about.
Right. It's just
than
overload.
just, point A and point B.
Yeah. I love that about that. I've seen this from a number of kung fu practitioners that will talk, not the arm specifically, but that in the overload of the brain and in different sections and mechanics. And it's one of the reasons why I always really like that about kung fu too, because Parker has just such an analytical, scientific approach to things, and always said that this is the sister art of kung fu because they have that type of a mentality too, and the deep study of kinesiology, of how many different things the body does and does not do. And, they always say it's one of the funniest things that doctors and nurses become some of the best martial artists because they know exactly, what it's not supposed to do and how to take it to a place where, well, we're just going to do this then.
Oh, so much. Yes, I had a student who was a neurosurgeon, and he was the chairman of the board or on the board of directors of some bank out in Central California in Stockton or whatever. And he came with his whole family to take self-defense lessons because they were going to take a world trip on a sailboat. He was going to buy a sailboat, and they were going to take 2 years, and they were just going to sail around the world, him and his family. This was his dream. And he wanted his entire family to understand self-defense, and this guy taught me so much. One time I was doing a workshop on pressure points, and I was talking about, hitting the mastoid, right? Striking the mastoid with fluid shockwave, right? There are three ways to attack a pressure point: pierce, pound, pulse. You can pierce and applying simple pressure. You can pulse using an agitation motion, or you can pound, and different pressure points respond differently. I was talking about the right side of the neck, the mastoid. That's all I call it at that point. I call it the mastoid, the neck. I said, if you strike this side of the neck very, very hard with a blunt force, it will cause unconsciousness. It will cause somebody to be knocked out. And after the class, the guy comes up to me and he goes, "That was fascinating, Sensei. Do you know why that happens?" And I was like, "No." And he said, because that's all I will ever say to a neurosurgeon if he asks me a question is, "No, please tell me." And he said, because he goes, that side of your neck is the vagus nerve that runs through your heart. He goes, on the left side of your neck, or on your right side of your neck, it runs behind your lungs. You don't have to worry about that. But this side, it runs through your heart. Think about this. Think about a nerve that goes from here all the way down, goes through your heart, and the tail of that nerve comes out the back of your heart. And he's just all fascinated. He's like looking at me with these eyes. And he goes, so what happens when you strike the vagus nerve very hard? It causes a reset of the parasympathetic system and a rapid deceleration of the heart. It causes a rapid deceleration. So let me tell you what that means. That means that their heartbeat is going to go from 70 or 80 beats a minute to 2 instantly, and a body at rest. Goes, so it's going to look like they passed out. It's going to look like they had a heart attack, but they didn't have a heart attack. They had a rapid deceleration of the heart. And so you need to defibrillate to bring that back. And he went, he was just fascinated by the fact that he knew why when you strike somebody there.
Right.
Years later, I'm watching a physician from England on TV on a show. I don't know what it was, but he's talked about the rear naked strangle. And he's got a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt there. And he's got one of his patients or one of his students all hooked up to the, heart things. And they've got the monitors. And the jiu-jitsu master puts the choke on and immediately puts this guy unconscious. And what they realized is that it happened as a result of agitation of the vagus nerve.
Uh-huh.
He went unconscious because of the rapid deceleration quicker than the loss of blood, or the loss of oxygen, the anoxia.
Right.
And so what he was saying is, so if you have to do a rear naked strangle, either one's going to work, but it's more efficient to use your right arm because then the radial bone will apply pressure to the correct vagus nerve, and you're likely to render somebody unconscious even more quickly than if you're just taking their oxygen. And
Oh,
that's fascinating.
that's gold right there. I tell you what,
Yeah, that's insane.
all of our people who wrestle and grapple and do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, hope you take notes on that part, Mike. So the right arm, the
It's
right side, I
crazy.
did not know that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I know that's a huge part about, so not just consciousness, but literally life and death. When Jared was murdered, they were talking about that in his hospital bed. That night, his father had called me. I actually haven't mentioned that part ever on social media, but I got that call from my friend. It was his father, who was also in the Navy, he's a veteran, and they were trying to stimulate the vagus nerve to bring his brain activity back. And that's what they said that they did for people who had basically gone into a vegetative state. They put him on the oxygen machine, and but apparently that whenever that happens and somebody is in a coma, then they end up having to stimulate the vagus nerve, and that's gold right there, though, to know that, especially for all of the cage fighters and all the people out there. So if you're listening, from Michael Sensei, he has that lesson for you on the right arm going over and getting on the left side of the neck. That's where you want to do it. It works on both sides, but the right arm, left side of the neck is better.
I'm going to take the vagus nerve. The other vagus nerve goes behind your lungs, which someone told me that's why if you fall onto your back, that's why you'll lose your wind. You know, just like getting hit in the solar plexus. If you get hit in the
Oh,
center of your back, it could be a
really?
vagal response. I
Wow.
don't know.
Okay. There's,
But
and I love.
then just to backtrack for a second, I want to also once again condolences. I
Oh,
mean, what you went through with your student is the most horrific thing. It breaks my heart, and
yeah.
it must have been. I can't imagine. I can't imagine what it must have been.
Thank you. Yes, largely why I do what I do today, still, because I've never really been able to let it go. I've always felt it was my responsibility to make sure, and everyone's always said, that there's nothing I could have done, but back then we didn't do what we do now. I never stopped looking. I wasn't into firearms 11 years ago, and we did Eskrima, but I didn't do Kali. I went into Filipino martial arts and firearms specifically because that same year I had a knife pulled on me, and everything from there. I didn't really consider karate to ever be BS, but it also just wasn't the same as real violence, and I went looking for the things and the instructors that bridged it. My father was one of them. We always did very much so the real thing because of his career and how he built it up. And Parker's was excellent. He was always very violence of action oriented. But when an edged weapon came out, everything just
It isn't
changes.
the same as real
Um,
violence. It's not the
it's
same as real violence, just like you said.
yeah,
It is
yeah.
not the same as real violence. No matter what, you cannot make that the same as real violence. When you had a knife pulled on you, what was the circumstances? How did that go down?
It
Was that before
wasn't,
or after?
so I didn't get stabbed. He didn't actually even lunge. I made the mistake of thinking, that because he's quite a bit smaller than me. And I saw him beforehand as he walked by. It was like midnight. He was cleaning out the trunk of my car. He had something in his hand. It was just a kid walking around our apartments, and I was getting ready to go to night shift, cleaning out the back of my trunk. He walked around past me, around the back of the building, flanked me, and he just kind of waited there and watched me for a minute, and he kept on, like, I guess, flicking his knife. And it was my partner at the time, my daughter's mother, who had just come outside, and I was like bent over in the back of the trunk, and all of a sudden I heard her scream my name, and I stand up and I look up because we were on the second floor, and I look up, And then I just see her and I look immediately down, and it was that same person that I just kind of dismissed earlier, because he was probably only about 5'6" or so, maybe 5'7", and I'm 6'2" and over 200 pounds. And I mean, I'm bigger now, but it's probably still about 200, 205, 210. He's maybe like between 130, 150. It just didn't even register that he was going to be any kind of a threat whatsoever. And then he had that knife. He was actually, by the time I looked at him, he was stanced out. It was here. If I shuffled once, I could have kicked him. And so I'd say somewhere between 6 and 7 feet away. And, but she screamed out my name, and he stopped. And I thought, because I thought at the time it was because I was just so much bigger than him, and it wasn't that at all. He lost his element of surprise, and so random act of violence. Never seen him before, never saw him again. But I was cognizant that it was a 3.5-inch folder knife, but it looked like a katana. I always tell everybody it looked like a freaking sword, man. It was huge, gigantic knife.
Sure.
And he walked in. He walked into the apartment across the way, and oh my God, I was stupid, and I started screaming at him. Hey, what the hell was that? What the hell is your problem? You got something to say, son? And it was
that takes some chutzpah right there.
That's it. Well, it was, and that's what
Your piss took over.
Oh yes, that's my ego took over too, and Instructor King calls it the callback, and I didn't even realize a level of danger that I was in, because it was the same year that Jared had passed, but that hadn't happened just yet. Where Jared passed, and so
it was before that.
It was before it,
because after that, you talk those questions you asked initially.
Yeah.
This situation falls right into that. Imagine if it had been after the fact, what your response would have been.
That would have been.
That knife would have been very different. Mm-hmm. What do you think you would have done? Do you think differently?
I hadn't created MLH yet. I designed my own protocol for that, specifically when a blade comes out, just because I feel that
stabbing event.
So MLH is the protocol I wrote. It's basically, I changed it a number of times. It was the most effective tactics in the least amount of time and the highest value targets. Basically, if an edge weapon comes out, that we are pulling our own tool, provided you have a self-defense tool. I did a number of different instructors there with Kali, and I don't really have any. I have the return to sender type of thing that Kosakowski does, but I don't have the arm locks to trying to take it away, just because I know I'm going to be getting cut. And so if it comes in and I don't have a tool on me, the manipulation of taking it back into them. Parker had that too, with a technique called raining lance, but it's essentially either via his tool or mine, ice picking methodology and throat, and going directly in. There's a whole bunch of techniques I created for it, but basically that we're taking his throat, we're taking underneath the sides, the kidneys, or mastoid or temple, but very, very neutralizing techniques, methodology of that, if that happens. And I don't know, because in the moment I didn't have the karate response. I didn't have I just looked down at him, and my only thought in the moment was, that's a knife. That's all I remember thinking was, that's a knife.
But you are thinking now, in retrospect, that if you had shuffled in, if you're close, you could have kicked it.
I might have been able to, so that was the distance.
Did it occur to you in the moment?
No. Nope. All I thought was that was a knife. I didn't think anything. I went from that's a knife to him turning away and realizing what happened to really pissed off and screaming. And my sensei, actually, my father, he came out and stayed there with the family, because I had to go to work. He came out and stayed with the family, and I did call the police. They actually came out. It was like a lady sergeant or something, and she said, Mr. Thompson, did he lunge at you? I said, no. And she said, okay, if you tell me that he swung at you, we can go kick in that door, because I watched it was literally across the street, the parking lot. Where he went, and he said nothing. He walked there.
Well, she was leading you a little bit there.
Yeah, she needed. Well, so and to tell me what I need, because she could tell I was visibly shaking. We were all like, holy crap, we just had it, because he did legit pull a knife on me, but and I said, no, ma'am, he didn't. And she said, okay, I appreciate you being honest with me, because if you tell me that he lunged at you, then we're going to kick that door in. We're going to go get him, but I'm going to put you on the stand. So I want you to know that. And I was very honest with her because I wanted to say it, and I appreciated like she was kind of leading, but she was also like, this is the reality of what's happened. I think we should go in there, but I can't tell you that. And also, you're going to have to testify, by the way, that this occurred. And she kind of said that without saying it. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to lie on the stand. I will always tell the truth, but holy crap, are you kidding me? What do you mean you can't kick the freaking door in? And they left a couple units there to watch. By the time I got back a few hours later, they were gone. And it was so silly. And that night, I also went and talked with, it was Lafayette PD. I went and talked with one of their guys there because they were at the gas station, and I sat down with them. I told them what happened, and I asked about firearms because, I had had training with that with my father before, but I hadn't had the legal application of what's the process of getting it. How am I, going to carry it? What does all of this look like? I knew my father could answer all of that. It was also like 1 o'clock in the morning, so I wasn't going to wake him up because I was fine. And it was ironic because the guy that I was talking to, the cop, was a firearms instructor himself. And he said, when you go through and do this, you can open carry in this state. Nobody really does that. You get a concealed permit. That's the best way to do it. Get some training with it. And I explained what happened. And he said to me, I'm glad you called the cops. I think that, when these things happen, yeah, you absolutely should have been, in a situation where you could have drawn on the man and had a good reason to, because when these things happen, you can give them one chance and they start lunging, and then, you have to use your tool. And it was really interesting at that time too, because like I said, this is like 11 years ago. It was like 2014. And I had not even thought, because I always thought, it wasn't until probably 4 or 5 years ago now, that I thought about that with the majority of people. When they shoot, they extend. And we always say the best aim is in the frame. But I did this deep dive, like I've always treated firearms like it's martial arts itself, where we study it. And I've done this deep dive where the majority of situations, we actually have to consider that there's a good chance people get to you. Like he was within but we were able to have been swinging at each other at that point. I use the kicking analogy because that kind of gives you the distance of about 6 feet, where too far to punch, but almost close enough to kick. And so one of the things that I designed for it was specifically that from the stress response and from the flinch response, we're going to probably end up doing this kind of a thing and pushing out, but we have to get our hand back. We're going to have to pull and draw. It's going to have to be either appendix or hip, and you're going to have to get to it very quickly, but you're probably going to have to retention fire, because if you go out like this on a guy and you're doing that contact shooting, he's going to be able to grab and touch it himself. If he's got a knife, then very, very, very easy to come up across and cut you and take your tool. And a huge part of all of that is retention firing. If you're not retention firing and holding on to your tool, it's great to always be at the range and practicing your accuracy, but reality is bad guys are good at what they do. They're good at getting to you, and they're good at going hands-on. So situational awareness is wonderful. I think a lot of people talk about it, though, and it's different to train it, and it's really different to have it. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do that with the shooting, because I've seen I think one other instructor talk about it, but almost always everyone starts off training like that. And I think it's good for the practice, but this is one situation where there's a lot of times, especially we'll read, like, even most cities and towns have police reports available, right? Like you can go through it here, police blotter, you can go read different things that what they do put out to the public. And bad guys get hands-on first. And so starting from this position, getting your hand up out of there and practicing this, because he's probably not going to be that far away. I mean, he might be, but there's a lot of that part from extending. It's totally different if they're cops, if they're military, because they have the knowing. They know what's happening, they're going, or at least they've been called to an area, they're traveling to an area. It's not that they don't come under a sudden attack, but they've got a situation. Whereas civilians, we're getting, the groceries, or we're in the trunk of our car at midnight pulling, things out to be able to talk stuff. Yeah. So
that's a tough situation. It's funny because as a novice with handguns, my instinct and I've maintained a noble silence because I'm ignorant on the subject. But My instinct has always said that when you call the retention fire position is how I'm going to want to fire my gun. Just like in grappling, why the hell am I going to give him my arms?
Right.
Why am I going to do that? Am I shooting at something that's running away from me? Why am I doing that?
Right.
But in any kind of situation where I don't know or where it is close, like you say, I want that right there. I don't want to give them anything. They've got to reach way deep in to be able to take that weapon,
Right.
and I can turn my whole body as a cylinder.
Yeah.
My whole body as a cylinder
Absolutely.
and fire. It's not something out here. It's going to get grabbed. It's going to get
Right.
muddled. It
Yeah.
just always seemed to make more sense to me,
Right.
to
Yeah.
fire from there. What's the only disadvantage? I'm not going to get a good headshot.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's two to the body, one to the head. So, we're going to most of the body anyway. It was interesting. I heard McPhee once talk about that, and he said he hadn't tested it, but he said that there's a number of professionals that will say it's the pelvic area that you're actually wanting to discharge at. And that's why I'll do a number of shots on Bob there in the pelvic region. Apparently, from a number of people, I don't have it confirmed, but from a number of people who were overseas and during the war, they would say that the pelvic area bleeds more. You'll bleed out faster. He said the same thing. He said, I don't know that it's confirmed. I don't know that, but that is what a number of professionals say who've done it. And I don't know. I'd be interested to hear the science on that, but I love it because that also does help solve a part of a problem depending on our height versus their height. And that rule number 4, backstop and beyond, has to be considered, where I could go low and get down, but usually we're angling off or we're in the clinch position. One of the reasons I'm a big judo fan is that in that clinch position, this is where the fight happens. So many times, like a lot of people think that they're fighting from here and they're sparring distance, but sparring distance is possibly on entry, possibly on exit, maybe. So much violence is just right in your face. You're hooked up into the guy.
In the clinch zone.
Yeah.
In the clinch zone.
Absolutely.
It's funny because one of the things, I did a lot of Kali, a lot of Eskrima, obviously I was in Stockton. But one of the things that UFC taught us immediately is there's no such thing as trapping range. There's no organic trapping range. Nobody's going to stop 12 inches in front of you and start to play hands with you.
Right.
When that distance is closed, it's going to a clinch. Now, what that led to is you can create trapping range. Once that clinch happens, one of two things is going to happen. It's going to go to the ground or it's going to return to striking range. One of two things. You're either going to manage a situation to where you're still standing, or they're going to manage a situation to where they've taken you to the ground. But if you're able to maintain your balance for that moment of the clinch, then you can post up. Then you can create framing. And in that instant, you can create that 12 inches so that now you can lock trap, you can, use shorter weapons. But if you think that that's going to happen organically, you're going to be on your ass. There's no such thing as trapping range unless you create it off of the clinch.
Yeah.
Like you said, you're either going to go down or you're going to go back. One or two things is going to happen off that clinch.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why the Tula rule and the rush back is so important from their 21 feet. Because it's the myth we all hear all the time from everybody is that, just get a gun part, and it drives everybody insane. Everybody who's ever taught martial arts is like, okay, stop. Just stop. That's not how that works. And, that all of those things, the clinch is just, I think, probably the most important section to even just start from. Because the moment that could be 2-3 strikes in, they could be edge weapon strikes in, you're bleeding, you've been hit. And a friend of mine, my brother Josh, he always talks about this. He always says, usually the first person to strike somebody in, that is the one that knows that there's a fight. The last person to know that there's a fight is the first person to be hit. And so that happens, and you're like, oh crap, I'm in a fight now. And you're always playing. That's what Miller always talks about. You're playing catch up. You're going to be playing catch up the whole time. It's great if you can know ahead of time, but the likelihood, if you knew ahead of time, you'd be walking away from it. Unless you're doing it as a professional, unless you're bouncing
or preemptively striking.
Right.
Or preemptively striking. I knew he was going to hit me, so I hit him back first.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely.
That's that moment. I try to explain to people most of what karate and kung fu do is most efficient preemptively. It's not designed to win a fight. It's designed to stop a threat. It can win a fight,
Right.
but if you're in a fight, then you missed all those golden opportunities to stop the threat.
Right.
And a
Yeah.
preemptive strike
Absolutely.
is almost always the best way to stop a threat. I knew he was going to
Absolutely.
hit me, so I hit him back first.
If you can, knowing is that golden moment. If you can know somehow, anyway, know ahead of time, that is
Well,
absolutely the
just
best.
believe. You can always apologize later.
Right. Right. Yeah. All right.
I
So,
just got to believe that I'm under threat. You're scaring me. I don't
right.
want you're scaring me.
Yeah.
If I said that to you twice,
I mean,
I'm going to stop you from scaring me.
the majority of states do an illegal threshold for that, even inside of lethality, is that fear for my life or lives built around me. And some states even have it listed as fear for my life or serious bodily harm. You can believe that they're going to break your arm, and that's enough, depending on where you go. And this is why it's always important for people to know where the laws are, where they are. And also, like you said in the beginning, knowing what extent you're willing to go to ahead of time. That stuff's huge. But yes, that's so much of why I love this with this series is, talking about those things and knowing that stuff ahead of time is just golden.
Yeah, and every situation is a life-threatening situation. John Hackelman says it best. You don't know that when he punches you, you're not going to hit your head on that
Right.
rock.
Right.
You're not going to, crash your skull into the parking stone that's down there, and now suddenly you're paraplegic or you're dead.
Right.
He may only want to break your arm, and he may toss you out into traffic. Everything is a life or death situation. Everything is worst possible scenario, and every threat must be extinguished, immediately. You were talking earlier about, not stopping until the threat is gone.
Oh.
We talk about the three minds, the three martial minds, mind like fire, mind like moon, mind like water. When I explain mind like fire, I explain it. If you light a popsicle stick on fire, it's going to burn evenly. It's not going to burn a little bit at the bottom, jump up to the top, burn a little, and then jump to the middle. It is indiscriminate. It's going to burn all of the fuel in its path. Doesn't hate, doesn't love, isn't jealous, doesn't want revenge. It's just fire. It just burns.
Right.
But the key to understanding that mentality is when the fuel is gone, the fire goes out.
Right.
When the fuel is gone, the fire goes out. It doesn't sit there trying to burn ashes. And because it wasn't morally invested in the moment, I sleep at night. I have no guilt. I had to move to mind like fire because somebody was trying to help me enjoy a very, very, very bad day. And whatever that fire needed to burn in order to keep that from happening, I got to be fine with that. It wasn't my choice. It's not my karma.
Absolutely.
It's that mind like fire.
Right.
I had a student. Do you know who Richard Kim was?
Uh-uh.
Well, he was one of the great pioneers of our time. Ed Parker, contemporary. And Richard Kim was one of the great. One of the biggest things we used to lament is that he refused to allow people to record his lessons. Everything was so much of his brilliance was lost. He's the guy that came up with the quote, "I'm probably not going to want to punch you in the foot. Why am I going to kick you in the head?" That's one of my favorite quotes.
Okay. Nice.
When he talks about reality self-defense. But John was one of his black belts. And he told me a story about another one of their black belts who was a woman. And she came into the dojo one weekend and told a story about getting raped. And she said that in this moment, she was confronted in the hallway of her apartment, I think, and forced into her apartment building. And she said, this man was the same age as my son. And he reminded me of my son. And in the moment when I realized I could have done something, I could have gouged his eyes out, I could have bit his lip off, I could have smashed his nuts, whatever she thought she could have done to be effective, she said her words, I couldn't do it because I saw my son. I could not convince myself to create any kind of catastrophic damage to this guy, to hurt him. And when I heard that, I was furious at her. I'd never met her. It was 20 years before I got told the story. But I was furious at her. To make yourself an agent of karma? What do you think he's going to suddenly have an epiphany and never rape again because you showed him compassion? It was awful to me. But that's when I started coining the phrase, the biggest gun in the world won't save your life if you refuse to pull the trigger.
Right.
If you refuse to pull the trigger.
Absolutely.
I tell my students, so many people have that, fight or flight, freeze. freeze is what most people do. And the reason most people freeze is because they're afraid that, yeah, I know he's going to hurt me, but he's going to hurt me even worse, badder if I make him mad.
Yeah.
I tell people in that moment, somebody's going to get hurt. Get that in your head.
Right.
Somebody is going to get hurt. But it's going to be one of two things. Either somebody is going to get hurt as a result of their own evil intention and malicious desire to impose their will upon another agent, or someone is going to get hurt as a result of somebody else imposing their will upon them. Only one of those is right. You must, as my student, get it through your head that only one of those is acceptable.
Yeah.
You know, when they bring it on themselves, you must not worry about the ramifications of the law. You must not worry about the flight of blood, and you must not worry about dying. You must do what you must do. And that story infuriated me. And I guess I told it as a warning.
Right.
You know, the biggest weapon in the world won't save your life if you talk yourself out of it.
Right. Absolutely. That's very, very well said. All right, sir. I actually have to go. I've got my wife here, but I do want to ask you one more if I can, because there was a few of these that we had on through. You actually did go over between all of the lessons, and thank you so much for this, because you shared so many wonderful different stories along the line that it's just
letting me vent my spleen.
Whole lot of lessons here. The one I really want to ask you though is the tool. If you could give the audience one mental tool or a piece of invisible armor to carry with them, what would it be?
There's no such thing as a no-win situation.
Okay.
Believe that. There's no such thing as a no-win situation. When you give up is when it ends. When you give up. I worked with an individual. We did a lecture tour together. He was way heavier than I am informationally. He was a wonderful person to learn from. I learned so much from him. But he had interviewed John Wayne Gacy, and he would use this as part of his lecture. He had interviewed John Wayne Gacy in prison, and he had asked him, this is how he would put it. So I asked him, I said, there were so many different boys, so many different men, so many different ethnicities and styles and types. What did they have in common? They had to have had something in common that made you target them. And he said, they got in the car. The one thing they had in common, they got in the car.
Wow.
Don't get in the car. If somebody tells you that, let me tie you up or I'm going to hurt you, well, let them hurt you. Hurt them back first. The minute you give up that autonomy, the minute you get in that car, the minute you give them their back, the minute you agree that if you do everything right, they're not going to hurt you, you're going to be hurt.
Very, very well said. I've thought about that a number of times when people say, you know, well, do this or I'm going to shoot you. And it's something that almost all, I know I've quoted it, you quoted it, so many instructors have quoted it and said to everybody, no second locations. Your chances, they fall so far down. If you get taken to a second location, get in the car, I'm going to shoot you, shoot me.
You're dead. You're dead. You've just conceded. You've tapped.
Just dead worse if you have time as a process predator to take me somewhere and do worse things. So, yeah, and we tell that to women in self-defense, you know, too, is they're trying to do that. You fight like hell there. You scream like hell there. You take their eyeballs out of their head there, because
whatever
if you can't get to that second location, it's going to be worse. So you do it now, right now.
And you can do it if you recognize there's no such thing as no situation. I was watching Sally Fields on the Actors Studio, and they asked her about, in Norma Ray, she has a scene where they drag her into a car, and she's at a protest, and she won an Academy Award for that. And they four guys have to drag her into a police car to take her to jail. And she, in the Actors Studio, she said she asked the director, how hard do you want me to struggle? She's 4'11", 4'10", and maybe weighs 110 pounds soaking wet. And the director said, don't let him put you in the car. I want this to be real. Just don't let him put you in the car. She said, one broken knee, 2 dislocated fingers, and a bloody lip later, the director came up and said, struggle, but let him put you in the car. The point is you can flail, you can pitch, you can flail, you can pitch, you can flail. You can make yourself so totally uncompliant. Somebody says, get in the car or I'll shoot you. Fucking run. What are the odds that they're going to shoot you and then drag your dead, bleeding body back into the car because that's where they wanted you in the first place? You know, there's no such thing as a no-win situation.
Absolutely.
Never comply. Never comply.
I've heard the cops actually say that if you get shot there, you have a higher chance of still getting to the hospital and surviving the bullet wound than you do at that second location. And I thought, man, that's got to be
your funeral.
Yeah, that's I thought, man, we have to get that across the nation to the whole world, have everybody know that part, because everybody thinks, okay, if I don't go with him, it's going to be worse. And it's actually the opposite of, no, you're better being shot here. And I just thought,
here's another,
wow.
I know you got to go and I got to go too, but here's another great story that didn't happen to me. So when I was in acupuncture school, I had a daughter, I was doing a lot of security work, but I decided I wanted to be an acupuncture doctor too. So I was working at a porn shop, like adult movie theater. And so I could study a lot. I just took tickets and I had my books, and it was a perfect work job for me. And I was probably 27. And the dude I was working with was an older guy, and he'd been through a lot. And one night we got robbed, or tried to get robbed. The guy came in with his hand in his pocket and he said, "Give me all your money." And Charlie said, "Show me the gun." He goes, "Oh my God, I'll give you all the money, but show me the gun." He goes, "What the f- are you talking about, old man?" He goes, "I swear to God, I'll give you everything. Just show me the gun. Just show me the gun." And the guy fucking took off. He freaked out. He took off. And I was standing in the corner, and it happened very, very fast. And I had nothing to do with it. And I looked at him and I said, "What the fuck?" And he said, "Man, if you don't make him show you the gun, then everybody with a finger in a pocket is going to come in here and rob us every night." And he said, "I'll tell you a story. The biggest mistake I ever made, because I was working at a liquor store in Arizona, and we were on the mid-watch, and these 4 guys came in to rob us at like 2 o'clock in the morning. And they said, if you do exactly what we say, nobody will get hurt. And so they took all our wallets, they tied our hands behind our back, and they sat us lined up against the wall. Then they went in the back. So I think they were fucking with the safe. I don't know exactly what they're doing, but they were back there for several minutes. And then they came back out into the front, and one of the guys said, "Well, now we got to kill you." And he said, I got so pissed off. He said, my hands were tied behind my back. I was sitting on the floor. He said, I rolled over on my belly and I stuck my ass up in the air. And I said, "Well, then give me my goddamn wallet back, motherfucker." He goes, "Give me my goddamn wallet, because I don't want to be that asshole that did everything that you told me to do and you still kill my ass. Give me my wallet, take it out of my back pocket after you kill me, and then we'll be even." Right? And he said they started laughing and they left. He goes, "I don't know if they were going to leave anyway, if they were just fucking with us, telling us they were going to kill us. I don't know if I made them laugh and they decided they didn't want to kill me. But when the morning crew got there, they all got released. They were literally sitting there tied up for 3 or 4 hours." What a moment. What a moment of revelation. Well, God damn it, give me my wallet back, because I don't want to be that asshole that did everything you said and then you still killed me. You know, I was scooting across the floor. And this is the kind of guy that did it. That's the kind of situation that gives you the wherewithal about yourself to say, "Show me the gun. Show me the gun. God damn it, I'll do everything you want if you show me the gun." You know?
That just,
was insane.
Thank you so much, Michael Sensei. The amount of lessons in real violence, I swear to goodness, the amount of real violence lessons and fantastic lessons across the board from that one interview. I appreciate phenomenal. Very, very well done.
Thank you, my friend.
Your social media and your website and your bullet program, real quick, please. We do have to go, but I have everybody. And with this, so we can find you on social media where?
MichaelSensei.com.
Okay, MichaelSensei.com.
My website is www.michaelsensei.com. You can find me anywhere as Michael Sensei. We're going to be doing a real upgrade of the website, and we're also going to be adding the content. The next time we get together, we're going to be talking about our project.
Yes, sir.
And that right now is one of the most exciting things in my life, because the opportunity for you at this point to save lives that you never meet is like insane.
Indeed.
I appreciate you. I appreciate your expertise. I appreciate everything that you bring to the table.
Awesome. Thank you so much, sir. We very much so appreciate you. And we will talk with you here soon.
Do it again soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Very soon.
Have a good night, everybody.
My friend.
Thank you.
Peace.
So, bye-bye.